On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Brian Moseley. He is co-founder and CTO at Sixfold. We're going to be talking about critical technical decisions. Obviously, technical debt is not a new term. And we're going to talk about what it really means, whether we're dealing with short-term goals, the ramifications for the long term. How would the future you view these decisions? I think Brian had a great view of looking at this from a historical lens, ramifications. We're going to talk about some of the de-risking pieces. I'm super excited to have Brian on. Fantastic background. Thanks for being on the show, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, before we dive in, Sixfold, what do you guys do over there?
We make generative AI-based decision-making tools for insurance underwriters. It's really hot right now, I guess, to have ChatGPT-based wrappers for all kinds of different businesses or to help business workers do things. But we are, I guess, one of the first vertical solutions that at least I'm familiar with, where our entire existence is predicated on helping insurance underwriters do their work more effectively and generate more revenue and decrease their costs by applying generative AI to the work that they do.
Very cool. I mean, it's got to be a pretty dynamic space to be in. So I'm sure that keeps you busy. Thanks for taking the time out to be on the show. And this topic is going to be centered around technical decisions, and really, I think we talked about this originally. I think we just talked about it before hitting record, about the concept of those critical decisions, the notion of technical debt. And I guess, a lot of times we hear technical debt come up as a reason, but just to be sure, because I know obviously technical debt can be viewed differently by different orgs, different people. Just for the context of how you view it, what is technical debt?
I mean, if you take it literally, the metaphor, right? It's like pulling out the charge card and getting the benefit of spending money today and having to pay the money back down the line, and like applying that to a sort of technical decision-making process. It's a way to exist within constraints and be able to meet some kind of short-term goal by making a sacrifice, by making some kind of trade-off. And those things have consequences, those choices, whatever they are. So, we're in a situation today. I was just talking to one of my engineers earlier today. We need to ship something 9 days from now. And it's the first version of this brand new feature. We think many more customers are going to want it than the one we're building it for today. But we don't know if that's true or not. And so the constraints we have are time. And within a very small time box, we have to decide how good the technical solution is going to be, how scalable it's going to be. Could multiple customers use the thing we're making right now, or will we have to invest more in it after this 9-day deadline? And there's no right answers. There's only trade-offs. So, that's a situation where we pull out the card and we charge some debt in order to get something that works for that customer 9 days from now. And then we know we're going to have to pay it off down the road. Either we rip this feature out because nobody else wants it, or when we invest more in the feature to make it scale. There's a lot of lean orthodoxy, or has been for 15 years, about just keep your eyes focused on the next step. Just do the minimal amount you need because you ain't going to need it or whatever. And I think that leads to a lot of short-term decision-making. You charge on the card without thinking about your plan to pay it back. And so, that's why I think you have to be able to always be thinking down the road, even if you're not acting in a way that helps you get down the road faster. If that makes sense.
No, it does. And I love the example, by the way. And I love the fact that it came up recently, and we're talking about a real life situation, and I love the analogy of the charging now, paying off later. I think we come up with a ton that fit, but I love that one. I guess it's kind of hard because I kind of look at this notion of you're in a vacuum of making a decision right now for the future. We don't know the future. For most of us, as we make decisions for day to day, we make what's optimal for balance of now and later, because obviously you don't have a 9-day delivery. Now, if I had to, have a near-term objective that had those consequences, I obviously would be in that position. But when you're looking at technology, you're looking at code, you're looking at this decision for you guys to, hey, we need this in there for 9 days. The value to the org is high. This has to be done. Whether it's done optimally or not, that's a different question. And then we're coming back later and examining these decisions, and we're kind of taking a fine-tooth comb over these and going, well, those decisions made X amount of months or years before are the reasons I have a roadblock now. But we lose the context of looking back. That person, let's say if you hire somebody and in 3 years they look back and this feature was good and you guys kept it as is for the most part, you might go back and say, this was garbage you guys did. He doesn't know. It might have been the most important thing to the company. It shifted the whole company's trajectory. I guess when we're looking back, and a long-winded way of asking this question, is it fair to go back and look at in-time short-term decisions or just in-time decisions with a backwards lens and go, hey, you know what, this is right, this is wrong?
I mean, in absence of any countervailing information, it's totally fair. And I've done it with myself many times.
Yeah.
You know, I told you before we started recording, I have a terrible memory. Well, that terrible memory means I don't always retain the context of decisions I made in the past. And so, you know, when I come back and relook at them, what was I thinking? And that's why, among other things, when we were writing up our pull request guidelines earlier today, I put a note in there about comments, source code comments. And you can extend this concept to specs as well, technical specs, product specs, what have you. If you write down your reasoning around the choices you're making and you record them, you know, as a memento for the future, then that helps you with bad memory in the future get back into the frame of mind you're in when you made that original choice and know the context. We have to deliver for customer A in 9 days, and therefore I'm going to do this garbage. But I'm also going to add a task in my project management system to come back in 3 months and revisit it. Do we need to scale this? Do we need to rip it out? Do we need to leave it? And I'm going to leave that record to myself and to other engineers who will come after me in the source code to explain why we did it this way. You know, among other things, that's going to build empathy, because future engineers are going to look back and say, I have a little more of a sense of the pressure that they were under or the trade-offs that they chose to make. In absence of that stuff, all you've got is hopefully some wisdom from a career that says, I've been in that position many times. That may well be what happened here. Barring that, or if you're just super judgmental, like many of us are earlier in our life, you're going to look at that and say, that was garbage. That person was stupid. Can't believe that terrible decision was made. Hopefully experience will keep us from doing that too much, but also being kind to ourselves by recording our context makes it more likely that we'll be judged less harshly in the future.
Do you think, you know, that context, and I think that's actually, to me, when I think about this, I think that's a key component to this, because a decision in and of itself without that context is just really hard. We're making tons of assumptions. And obviously, depending on how much further back, like you, my memory only holds so many seconds of the day, and then I forget as well. And you forget that context, and you're trying to think about that decision, and you're like, well, there must have been some good reason that we just made these decisions. Now, you mentioned leaving those notes, leaving the context. I guess, what have you seen work? Have you actually seen people leave video snippets and actual non-written forms of that context to help future people, or is that something you guys have tested to tried?
I haven't seen video. I think it's a really interesting idea. We have just started talking amongst ourselves about how to be more asynchronous, how to use meetings better as a vehicle for communication, and we've started talking about adding videos into our repertoire a little bit more when it's more of like a broadcast situation as opposed to a dialogue. And, you know, and that can be consumed asynchronously. Well, this is a format in which like asynchronous recording of context could actually be really useful. So I love that idea, and I'll put it to my team. I worry a little bit, I guess maybe the engineer in me worries a little bit about delegating that to some third party that may not exist a year from now. But, you know, that's a solvable problem, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
I like that idea a lot, because, you know, video is the densest sort of factor of, you know, for information sharing that we have, and probably what we can say in 30 seconds, you know, far exceeds what we're willing to type in order to convey the same amount of information. So much less like try to consume that in the format of a source code file or a spec doc. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was thinking about, I own a recruiting company now, but I was a software engineer, and I thought of to my days of actually commenting code, or, adding in notes about decisions at the time. I was like, damn, I probably sucked at that, because I also didn't want to spend as much time doing that as I wanted to actually get the code out. And I was like, it probably could say a lot more in 15, 20 seconds than I could have typed, and probably just would have been something I would have been okay to do on the fly. So I actually think it would be a really interesting experiment to see as we get further Gen AI tools through these various code repository products out there, whether or not they'll be able to sit on top of this type of data and actually help you down the road. Microsoft, if you're hearing this, just remember me. I'm just kidding.
or random open source hacker, give us a VS Code plugin that will let me record a loom by pressing a button or hitting a keystroke while I'm in my editor. I can talk, insert a link right there. That would be amazing.
You see a lot of people do that when they are trying to explain pretty much anything. I mean, I actually, when I've worked with just a developer to update our website, we've gone back and forth in Loom just to kind of help each other understand things, because trying to type it out, I was like, it's impossible. Like, I'd rather record that 1 minute Loom and send it to you. But yeah, certainly if it's in an editor, I think actually this could be a really interesting idea. I'm sure not very technically difficult to solve. I think you might put it out there yourself in the next 2 weeks, and I'll be super excited for you. But anyways, I digress. Going back to this, so obviously context is important. I think you mentioned experience and context. Let's just assume, I mean, you've been at bigger organizations as well. So Sixfold is a startup. You're a co-founder. People can go on LinkedIn, look you up. You have worked at some really nice companies in your past, and obviously have experience working in different environments, startup or big company. As you grow, and maybe this is your startup co-founder lens on this, as you grow and you're going to start seeing other people hired in, and there will be decisions, this one that you mentioned, the 9 days out product feature that needs to ship, that will come up. How do you think you and the team are going to start handling that? Because this is sort of kind of drops into technical debt and tribal knowledge. I think the two start overlapping, and that's when people hit the wall and they're like, well, I just don't know. I mean, going back to context, you might answer the same question the same way, but just kind of curious how you envision the team scaling and not hitting that tribal knowledge roadblock potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's been weird. I've been in a lot of cultures that were very meeting heavy, that were really about having conversations with each other to exchange knowledge, and didn't have, I don't know, the patience or the instinct to write things down. And I can't explain to you why cultures evolve that way. Maybe among other things, we've just, as a large culture, have lost the instinct for writing. We type, we chat, we have, we do instant message kind of communication, and we've forgotten how to write prose. So I think that's maybe part of it, and part of it is it's perceived to take a long time relative to speaking to another person, and it's not wrong, but there's a different ROI on it as well. And so I think writing things down, drawing pictures, and using those as a basis of communication to future team members, like with that in mind explicitly, I think that's just a huge part of how you scale. I think I'm really happy with how much we've written down about how to set up a development environment for a new team member. And the documentation is never perfect. It's always changing and it's always out of date. But the next person who joins has a great baseline to start from, and then they make it better. They ask some questions, they figure out some bugs, and they make the documentation better. And in that way, they start to build a little bit of depth of understanding of the system and not just follow instructions, without interrogating them or, knowing what they're doing. So I think the act of writing has to get incorporated into the larger activities of the team more for the purpose of memorializing information for future people and giving them a better platform on which to start or on which to make decisions. And when I say write, insert video here, insert audio here, like it's all these different things that aren't of the moment and transient kind of knowledge exchanges between two people. That's super important. And I want to say, whether it's been in a big company or in a small company, the value of diagramming aspects of a software system has just always been underestimated. Again, I got on a whiteboard with a developer today and sketched out a sequence diagram to articulate how we were going to address a seemingly very simple technical implementation. And like 5 questions fell out of a 20-minute conversation around a single diagram that developer hadn't thought of and that nobody else on the project team had thought of. And if we hadn't done that exercise, those questions wouldn't have occurred to them until very late in the process, when, as we know, making a change is correspondingly more expensive, especially when you're under the kind of the 9-day you're in the 9-day scenario, right? Figuring out a major architectural stumbling block 6 days into that 9-day project is going to be a really big problem. But we just noticed it by just through the virtue of having a conversation around a whiteboard for 20 minutes this morning. So incorporating those activities into your process early and getting everybody on the same page about the intent of the design or the intent of the architectural choice, or what we're going to do together, what it looks like before we get into the code. So incredibly important. Again, it's about like putting a story on paper or on a whiteboard and not just talking and assuming we are sharing definitions with the words that we're saying to each other and all of that.
I'm gonna ask you a question that's going to be tangential to what we've been talking about, but also I think still fits within the conversation. Might not be popular, but that's not what I'm here for. A lot has been said, because you just talked about the whiteboard, and we're talking about technical debt. We're talking about those collaborations coming up with optimal for now. Think about those scenarios the best you can. I think all that's been great. I think the conversation fits. You mentioned the whiteboard, and I instantly think to the last 4 or 5 years where we had to work from home. There's a whole struggle and battle about people being remote now. It's a big thing. In office is less desired. You did make me stop and think and go, I wonder how much of that whiteboard collaboration that we got so used to for over decades of work experience. And again, obviously, through the pandemic, we had to accommodate that. I understand that. I'm not sure if we really came up with processes that were as easily replaceable to what we had in person. I think it's very difficult to stand and point and do some of those things with video. When you're kind of maybe looking at this conversation of collaboration and you're looking about these decisions 9 days from now, you're trying to make optimal decision points, that whiteboard session, how effective would you be if you weren't standing next to each other? And we're not talking about doing this like in a meta 3D. We're talking either fully remote or, at that whiteboard. I mean, how different would that conversation be if you were fully remote and doing it over Zoom or whatever, Teams or whatever the platform would be?
It's more difficult. It really is. I think that there are things that you can do to mitigate the difficulty. You can work harder to make sure that everybody's sharing a language, so that there's an economy of word usage to make that conversation more expressive. But there is a kind of a local maximum to that. And I think being able to draw a picture fluidly and have people observe it in real time is so important. And I've never found a digital tool that allowed me to feel as communicative in the moment as I have on a whiteboard or a flip pad on an easel or whatever it is. And I think that that's just something that you learn to live with when your team is remote. Now, I will say we've lucked into having a technical setup in our big conference room where we have a camera that can zoom right in on the whiteboard. So I can stand in front of the whiteboard and draw, and the remote people can see me. But that's a one-way communication. They don't have a whiteboard and a camera to zoom in on it, so I can see what they're drawing. So it's not good enough, but it's better than trying to sketch in one of the digital whiteboard tools while we're all looking at it. None of us have adequate. Most of us don't have adequate sketching ability to make that useful, right? When you're trying to draw with a mouse or on a trackpad or something. So I think even though I think most of the people in my generation and generations after me grew up not gathering around the whiteboard as much as like the programmers you might think of from the 80s or the early 90s probably did, I discovered it again late in my career after we all came back to the office. And it was refreshing to realize that we had this great tool available to us. But it really is most powerful when you put constraints on to, where everybody's with you. And I just don't see an adequate replacement yet for doing that digitally or with like mixed groups, which is sad. I don't have a solution.
Yeah, I think, I still do a lot of digital notes. I still have paper and pad because I feel like there's things that, drawing an arrow, whatever, a box around. There's little things that are still easier, faster done by hand than digitally. I think the work from home, yeah, certainly, obviously, I didn't want to make this a work from home, but obviously there's huge benefits of not having interruptions. There's definite things that I think are fantastic. I do think the collaboration piece, when we're talking about critical decisions, and the reason I brought it up kind of further, tie back into the episode is as we're making these decisions, I sometimes do think about this, in the last 3-4 years, as work from home was the only way. A lot of decisions were made with less than optimal collaboration, right? And we could debate, somebody could be really great at sketching. I sucked at it. So a whiteboard for me, I'm almost 50. So for me, a whiteboard feels very comfortable. Maybe somebody younger never had to deal with that and they could care less. But I'm still thinking there's a mix of groups of people. And this notion of critical technical decisions being made, and we took out a very staple of technical people communicating on a whiteboard. I'm just curious, and again, I don't think there's an answer to this. It's just more of thoughts from you. I am curious to see what's going to happen when we start looking back, by 2030, and looking at some of the code and products that were born in that time, and wonder how much of it is technical debt, how much of that people have to go, hey, it's broken now, we have to fix it, because they just weren't in that optimal collaboration setting.
My guess is I have no data here. But my gut
just
is
conjecture.
My gut is that by and large teams are going to get to the same place eventually. But these kinds of collaborations accelerate the process because having this habit, building this muscle, gets you to interesting decision points or gets you to understanding important potential problems with a system or with a project faster. And that means I can ship faster and I can ship more things, or my team can be more productive. I think on balance, my team is more productive when we incorporate these activities, and we have the whiteboard, and we do write specs, and we put a sequence diagram somewhere where everybody can stand around that physically or virtually and look at it and have a conversation about it. That makes us more productive in the large. But teams that don't do those things probably still have similar conversations. They're probably later in the process more often than not, and they probably happen in an expensive way, right, relative to our median experience on my team. So I think engineering can be amazing and great and get the right outcomes without doing this stuff.
Absolutely.
But with the right people, with the right habits, you can accelerate.
Yeah, that's fair. No, I love that viewpoint. Yeah, to your point, there's no data points, I think, to go either way on this yet, and I think it'll be interesting as time passes to see how the tools progress. Because obviously, as this episode was around critical technical decisions, I do think this is one of those things where technology will catch up. My daughter has a VR headset, and we put it on, we play, and sometimes you're sitting there going, darn, it is really not too far away from being able to solve some of these problems. And you could actually see, but obviously that's a whole different conversation, a whole different episode. We'll kind of table that. But Brian, I appreciate you coming on. I know you got to get back to your actual day job, so I really do appreciate you sharing about these critical technical decisions and sharing with us some of the stories you did. I think were fantastic. If somebody does want to follow up with you because of something you mentioned on the show, if they want to learn about Sixfold, what's a good way of connecting with you to be able to do that?
Hit me up on LinkedIn or drop me an email at brian@sixfold.ai.
Okay, awesome. Brian, thanks again for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Good conversation. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think this is a great episode talking about tech debt, but more importantly, decision-making processes, decision-making context. I mean, a lot of different areas we dove into, even got into work from home. That's my fault, not Brian's. But it fit in within the critical technical decision parameters of the episode. And please share this with someone else. I think there's a lot to learn from this. And I think it's a good dialogue. And maybe there's other ideas out there of ways people are handling this. And I'd love to hear from you guys. So please share the episode, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is doing. Don't let me know about the work from home conversation because I probably pissed somebody off. But other than that, let me know how you're liking the podcast. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.